Good evening and welcome. We're glad you're here. I'm Lisa Hollensteiner. I'm board chair for Safe Passage. We have about a 30-minute presentation for you, so I'll tell you briefly. I'm going to speak first about my involvement in child protection. Representative Nash is going to talk about his childhood trauma and how he's used legislative advocacy to help Minnesota children. Doug Tice from the Star Tribune is going to speak about the media and Safe Passage. And then Rich Gehrman, our founder, is going to talk about Safe Passage more generally, and then the national impact we've had. Melissa DeBilzan, our executive director, will speak at the end about how you can support us, and then there will be a little bit of time for questions as well. So first of all, I want to note to all of you your courage and care for children coming here, because it's a horrific subject. But the fact is that these kids can't advocate for themselves, and we have to do that for them. So I appreciate your being here, and Safe Passage couldn't do what we do without the support of many generous people. So I worked as an emergency department physician for 32 years, and myself and my colleagues unfortunately did sometimes see heartbreaking situations of child abuse or suspicion of abuse. And as mandated reporters, I can't tell you how many times you get on the phone and I'd be saying out the side of my mouth to my partners, we have to call, but we all knew they weren't going to do anything, which was terrible because some of those kids came back dead. But one day I cold called Rich and I said, I want to get involved with Safe Passage because I need to do something positive here. And that was about the time that the Star Tribune had the series on Eric Dean and brought attention to child protection. And I wrote a letter to the editor talking about how medical professionals call child protection, knock on the door, and it's never answered. And Governor Dayton ended up reading my letter the next day at a press conference, and then they called me and asked if I'd be on the governor's task force on child protection, which was looking at the front end of it. I knew nothing about child protection, zero, nothing, but I did know that the system needed to be changed. So I want to tell you as an example about a case that I had and how advocacy has made a difference. So I had a 7-year-old child brought in by his grandmother who had been abused for years by his mother and stepfather. This time because he had not recited his multiplication tables correctly. He had so many bruises on his body and belt buckle marks that I could hardly see normal skin. And it was the start of a 4-day weekend, and I called child protection, and then the line was answered by a student who told me that they didn't have the staff to deal with the situation over the 4-day weekend. So I called the police, and the police said, okay, go home with grandma, we'll tell the family, and then we'll just deal with this next week. Perpetrators came to her place 4 times, banging on the door, very dangerous because the stepfather literally got out of jail that weekend on a weapons charge. She was hysterical. The police came to her door, charging her with kidnapping because the mother reported the child had been kidnapped because law enforcement and child protection didn't have any way to communicate with each other. Then the court system sent 2 orders for protection saying she was not to be near that child because the court systems didn't communicate with child protection. There were 4 calls to child protection over that weekend saying, this is terrible, terrible things are going on. But every time the person called, they had nothing in their computer system where they could look at previous reports to even know, oh, this is the 4th time you called? No, we don't have any record of the other calls. And when the child protection finally came out the next week, the grandmother told me that she thought that the child protection worker had the best interest of the mother in mind rather than the child. So just in that story, a few things that changed. One of which is, Kathleen was a great proponent, I'm going to read it here, changing the preamble of the child abuse statute to say that the safety of the children must be of paramount concern. And before it had said family unity, which is really important, but it really has to be that the child's safe. Also now the person answering the phone can't be a student, it has to be someone who's a child welfare professional with a college degree at least, and the phones are answered 24/7. Law enforcement and child protection now have to co-report so they know what each other is doing. And then it is now required that the information on previous reports be in the computer system and that worker can refer to that. So that's an example of how advocacy has helped. There's still a lot to do. We had a really successful legislative session. The highlight, I think, was that we had passed an advisory council, which is going to be led by the Supreme Court to look at the rest of the system of child protection. And we're excited about that will bring some further changes that will help children.
So I lived here as a kid in Minnesota moved to Colorado, and from the time that I can remember, I got beaten by my dad a number of times, very dramatically. So I was beaten by my dad with baseball bats, axe handles, broom handles, fists. You can hear when your tormentor is storming up the stairs or across the house or some to get to you. And I heard my dad coming up the stairs. And I knew I was going to get it. I didn't know how. But my dad burst into my room, and I was just placing the bat on the rack. And he took the bat off the rack and just started beating me with it. Broke an entire side of my ribs. And here's where the mandatory reporter piece in my life fails me. So I'm taken by my dad to a hospital in Denver, Colorado. And it's always the same hospital. So I had gone many, many times to the hospital where my mom was the director of nursing. And my mom covered it up, made it go away. And it was always explained away as, oh, Jim fell. He's such an aggressive kid, he gets hurt. I found out later when I went back to say thank you to some of my teachers who had always made such a huge impact on me, and some coaches who made a big impact on me. But I went back to one teacher in particular. Her name is Pam Gordon, and I love her to death. She was my third grade teacher. She was a brand new teacher, and she could do no wrong. She was the best thing ever. She was fun. We had a great time. She told me, she calls me Jimmy, and you may not. But she said, Jimmy Nash, I want you to know that a bunch of us tried to save you. Because you would come in, and third grade kids, we're doing stupid stuff. Like you do a handstand in the middle of the room just because you can, and your shirt comes up and you see bruises, like you had said, you see evidence of abuse. And she went to make a report to the principal. I happen to remember his name too because it's burned in my memory. So Dr. Roy Siegfried made it go away. And a couple of other coaches tried to do things. And I don't know if it was the culture back when I was a kid that it was, it's a family thing. We don't want to get in the way of the family. We can't do that. Well, I'm here to tell you, we damn well better moving forward, because statistically it hasn't gotten any better since I was a kid.
I moved over to the Star-Tribune some years later and back into the news side. While there, I often advocated for the idea that, we ought to really dig into child protection. Now that these courts are open and, we can really see what's going on, we ought to do more with it. But it was an uphill battle, and not very much happened all the time that I was in the newsroom in those years until I moved back to the opinion side, now at the Star-Tribune. And a young reporter named Brandon Stahl came along in the newsroom, and he took up the same cause that, this is a story and we ought to dig into this and do it right. It took him a couple of years, as I understand it as well, to finally win permission and find the right story. And then he wrote a series called The Boy They Couldn't Save, about Eric Dean and the overall situation. And as has been described, that moved the needle. But I think we can say that that vision that Justice Blatz and others had all those years ago, although it's taken an awfully long time, has to some degree started to come to pass. As gradually as the media has gained a better understanding, and it's not just the Star-Tribune, KSTP has done some excellent work, and other outlets as well. But as the media has gradually come to understand and take more interest, share more of the realities of what's going on with the general public, some change has begun, but it's only begun. And so I want to emphasize this is why it's so important that we continue to inspire and inform journalists and frankly push back against other voices that have a very different view of these issues and certainly are making their views known to the media. But they need to be urged and enlightened to shed some light on the plight of these abused and suffering kids.
We really started where there was absolutely zero recognition of child welfare as an issue in this state. And we wanted, first of all, to get it on the radar to become a public policy issue of some importance. People like Doug Tice have been instrumental in making that happen, along with the Star Tribune and a couple of the electronic media outlets. So I think we somewhat succeeded in raising awareness of some of the issues such as like Representative Nash has talked about and has been highlighted in these news stories. For example, we, for the first time, established a standard in child protection that was statewide and was around when counties had to actually respond to child protection reports. Up until then, every county kind of did their own thing. And as a result, about 10,000 more children a year are getting screened into child protection in Minnesota, more than were before, and get some kind of child protection response, even if it's not always the best. But that brought in about $100 million in federal Medicaid money, which the state was required to match, and the county's doing a little more. So we went from $470 million to $690 million total revenues available to the system. Caseloads went way down, and a number of other good things happened. We were able to do 2 major reports on child fatalities from the time when Brandon Stahl left off in 2014 up till 2023. And we found many things. There's a copy of it here, recommended for your reading. But among them were that about 70% of the cases involved torture, that there were almost 17% of the kids were in kinship foster care. One of the big ones, which has not yet gotten on people's radar, is that black children are about 18% of the caseload statewide, but almost 30% of the fatalities. And conversely, white children are 50% of the caseload statewide, 24% of the fatalities. So we have practices that are really keeping black children in situations where we would frankly remove white kids. Those are some of the things that are going on that we've been able to kind of bring out because of this research. And this research got national attention, and we began to work with some people on a national level, including we actually helped to inspire a national website on child fatalities, which just went live last month. We're really excited about it. And it'll cover all the states, similarly to what's been going on here in Minnesota, with a big exception. Kathleen was the only person in the country to set it up so that child protection records and court records are public. No other state has that, and that was the reason we were able to do these studies. We couldn't have done it otherwise. We've made progress in areas that people thought would not be possible, and we have this significant national group that has some real weight, both research-wise and policy-wise, and also in terms of the resources in some of these think tanks, that is beginning to push back. So it is important to continue this work. It's important not to give up. It's not to say, oh, it's just politically impossible, because I believe we can turn the tide. I believe that it is starting to turn already, but we can't do it without you. We can't do it without support. Melissa and Lisa have done a fabulous job to keep this thing going under all this pressure in the last year. And we need to keep going from here. So we'll be, hoping that you can help us make this continue in the direction that it's been. So thank you.
A couple of things. Safe Passage is really the only organization of its kind in Minnesota that's dedicated just to advocacy and policy change. And so for that reason, we are not eligible for a lot of foundation funding or grants, things of that kind. So we rely solely on private donations. One way that you can help is send in a check, or you can give it to me. That would be one way you can do a contribution. Another way is we do accept gifts of appreciated stock. We can also accommodate donor-advised funds or qualified charitable distributions from your IRA. So if you're interested in, kind of some tax strategies and things like that too, we'd be more than happy to talk with you as well. Truly, our goal over the next 6 to 12 months is to raise about $75,000. We run a pretty lean organization. We're under $200,000 right now is our operating expenses. And so We run a pretty lean organization. We're heavily volunteer-based. But with that additional $75,000, it would allow us to expand and add some additional consultants who can help us to really seize on the opportunities that we have right in front of us to create change and work with legislators and work with the media. And so that's what we're really hoping to do in the coming months. The other way that you can support our organization is I highly encourage each of you to go to our website and sign up for our weekly emails. We send out weekly emails every Friday, and it'll just kind of give you a taste of some of the issues that we're tracking and some of the things that we're doing on a weekly basis. And so those come out every Friday, 6 a.m. You can watch for those, and it's also a great way for us to let you know when something is happening, when a vote is happening at the legislature, and you might need to call your legislators and let them know that you support it or oppose it. We do have a day on the Hill every day or every year. We had one just recently as well, and Representative Nash, you spoke at that. This year we had, I want to say, around 30 people who joined us. It was very effective. We set people up with their legislators, arrange those meetings ahead of time, and educate them with the help of our lobbying team on the issues that are most important to us, just picking 2 or 3 for that particular year. But we really do take the time to make sure that you understand where we're coming from, and you can have a conversation with your legislator, with your representative or senator, maybe both that day depending on their schedules. It really is a great way for you to meet with them and to advocate for this cause. And we had an incredibly successful legislative session. Really, almost all of the bills that we were advocating for passed, and there were some that we were not advocating for that did not pass. There were some that we were opposing, and we won't get into all the details of everything, but it was very successful. I think the bottom line is this is not an easy subject to not only talk about, but it's not an easy subject to advocate for either. It's very nuanced, and we have to be very careful in our approach and in our language. And yes, we are up against some parents' rights groups, and our focus has been and will continue to be child safety first. Child safety should always come first.